Greetings Exiles and welcome to yet another build guide. Do you want to play a build that's one of the most efficient in the game? Do you like multiple, in this case, up to 7 layers of defense? Are you interested in clearing multiple screens within 1 second, kill all bosses in the game, run every single map mod, play an extremely tanky bow character, and delete tier 16 Blighted Maps? Do you want all of that also on an off-meta budget build that works at league start with low investment and can be min-maxed to your desire? Then fasten your seatbelts and get ready for my Scourge Arrow Poison Pathfinder, my first bow character that clears everything on a budget. Okay guys, this intro was maybe a little bit too long, but this build is just insane when it comes to investment compared to power of the build. As always, I use PoE to share my build because that's for me the easiest, most efficient and best way to share my builds. So most of the stuff is within the notes section of the PoE, and I'm already sorry for everybody who cannot use PoE. But yeah, as I said, for me it's just the most efficient, the easiest way to share my builds. I'm going to try to put a lot of stuff into the video that I usually don't put into the video, just to give you guys who do not use PoE a little bit more information so you can also play this build. Timestamps can be found in the video description, along with a link to a video where I explain how to install and how to use Path of Building as a PoE beginner. This build is by far the best build I have ever played, in my opinion, at least on softcore. It features so much defense that you can pretty much only die if you're kind of sleeping or AFK, or if you're just, I don't know, having a 20-second lag. Even with a 20-second lag you might even survive. And the damage is also absolutely insane. On just some budget gear, you will easily reach 6 million poison DPS against Shaper or other boss targets. Poison, in my opinion, is one of the most overpowered mechanics in the game. Just kinda like Impale, but please don't tell GGG. Don't nerf Impale, don't nerf Poison. Really good. But for both mechanics, you really need to know how to scale them. But the real crazy part about the build is actually not the damage. The biggest advantage on this build, at least for me, are the multiple layers of defense. Total of 7 layers. The first one is you are ranged, meaning you can shoot from far away, sometimes even more than 1 or 1.5 screens away, and you can still deal damage. You might also notice that I have more than 7,000 life. This is obviously with some better gear than just 1 chaos items on each slot, but still, 7k life, even on an endgame pretty close to min-max character? That's big. In addition to that, you have a lot of evasion, not only from your items and your flasks, but you're also going to dodge because of acrobatics and phase acrobatics on the passive tree. And even if you get hit, your bow provides physical damage taken as chaos. That usually sounds bad because normally you don't have a lot of chaos resistance, but on this build it's super easy to max out your chaos resistance as well. And with the Pantheon, that pretty much means the bow and the Pantheon combined about 20% physical damage reduction, which is good. That's not crazy, but it's really good. Also, you have your skitterbots, which I recommend using in this build, which chill enemies. Chilled enemies are slower, so you even have more time to react. These are just all the passive layers of defense, but there are 2 more active layers. The first one would be you're a Pathfinder. That means your flasks are nearly permanent up, even against bosses, so you get a lot of evasion from there, maybe some resistances, and what's really important about that, life flask. Life Flask is pretty much your only live regen in this build, and once you get used to just using it once you get damaged, you are super mega tanky. But there's one more defense layer. Against bosses, you will also place down your wither totems, which hinder enemies for reduced movement speed, again, more time to react. And you can blind enemies and curse bosses with up to 3 curses, where you usually would take 2 defensive curses in there, sorry. This is by far the tankiest character I have ever played. Like, including softcore, hardcore, SSF, like, ever. This is the most tanky character I've played. Ever. By most tanky, I mean, if you're not sleeping, or if you're not going AFK, or if you're not completely lagging out the game, and if you're not face tanking everything, you can, by the way, tank a lot, like really a lot. You won't die, even in fully juiced Awakening 8 tier 16 maps, or I don't know, anything. I leveled to 98, like level 98 in maps, which I fully juiced, and I killed all bosses, and I killed all Conquerors, I did all challenges, I did all the Delirium stuff, I did like 15 Simulacrums, oh my god, I hate this word, Simulacrums, I believe I got it here. I did more than 50 T13 Blighted Maps, I do always, or pretty much always, Metamorphs. I did Delph 83, I killed Sirus, Shaper, Elder, Uber Elder, and all their guardians. Everything on Awakening 8 without even trying to level up. Like, I wasn't playing safe at all. You will sometimes see me just going into a pack and pretty much go into melee range, which is not, which you don't have to do on this build because you're ranged, but I didn't die once when I was leveling from 97 to 98. But I did all content that I pretty much could do without dying. So, yeah. For me, that's huge, because I always play over-aggressive and kind of cocky, you know? But nonetheless, you can die, obviously. This is no immortal character. But all deaths I had with this character were easily avoidable. Like, super easily by just not playing like a potato, face-tanking everything, or watching Netflix and not looking at the screen for like 20 seconds. But yeah. Talking about dying on this build leads me to the first weakness of the build, which is you don't have life regen. Like, you need to get used to use life flasks extremely often. I usually use a life flask whenever I see my life drop, because that's no issue since you are Pathfinder. So sometimes you can just, I don't know, like use a life flask 6 times in a row, and then you can still use it again. So yeah, don't hesitate to use your life flask there. Another weakness is that Scourge Arrow is a channeling skill. That means you have to stand still for a second until you load up your charges and then you fire it. And because most of the damage is damage over time that comes from poison, and the poison pots, like Scourge Arrow pots, have to kind of like spawn first. There's also a small delay. You can sometimes die if you are on low character level, or you have some super crappy gear or a really bad reaction time. The overall playstyle of the build is like super easy. You just charge up a few Scourge Arrow stages. Like in maps I usually do 2 or 3, sometimes 4, and then you release it. You will see the Scourge Arrow fly and leave a lot of spore pots in its wake, and then you will see a lot of arrows all over the screen and death everywhere. Like everything dies, chain reactions from your Ascendancy even off screen. The difficult part about this build is playing in closed quarters, like something like a Toxic Sewer map or something like that. Because the position of a cursor, especially against bosses or in closed maps, is kinda important. As you can see here, you are channeling to 5 stages, and you shoot the arrow, 5 pots appear, and the last pot, like the furthest pot, always tries to spawn on your cursor. There's a minimum distance between pots, so you cannot spawn all on top of yourself if your cursor is on top of yourself. They will still spawn in a row in front of you. If you shoot into a wall though, you will see that less pots appear even if there is enough space for 5 pots to spawn, and even if you have channeled up to 5 stages. But why is that? This is because the main arrow has some kind of duration. And during its duration, kind of like its flight duration, it spawns pots depending on how many stages you channeled for. If you fire this main arrow into a wall, that means that the arrow can't fly for its whole duration. That means less pots, and that means less damage and less clear speed. Against bosses and also in clearing situations, if there is a wall, you want to try to shoot in a parallel line to the wall and still hit the boss or your main target with your main arrow. Even though most of the damage comes from all your spore pod arrows, you still want to maximize your DPS, so you want to shoot parallel to spawn all pods and hit the boss with your main arrow. Also against bosses, like let's say Nico is the boss here, your cursor and the distance is important, like cursor distance to the boss, cursor distance to yourself, and the distance between you and the boss. The middle of the 5 pods should always be spawning below the boss, or this is what you're aiming for if you want maximum possible thorn arrow hits. That pretty much means the further away the boss is, you will place the cursor further behind the boss. If the boss is extremely close, you can put the cursor right on top of the boss, and on mid-range you can, depending on the range obviously, you should put the cursor a little bit behind the boss. So always trying to spawn the middle of the 5 pods below the boss. All of that makes a difference, but the difference isn't that big. So if you don't want to bother about it, then just don't bother about it. Another really interesting interaction is the interaction between Scourge arrow and additional projectiles. In this case, with a GMP, I will have 4 additional projectiles. That means 5 projectiles in total. If you have additional projectiles, you only shoot more main arrows, not more pots. That's really important to note. So, in my case, with a total of 5 projectiles, like 1 is just because you always shoot 1, and then 4 from greater multiple projectiles. Every main arrow spawns pots until its max is reached, which means 5 arrows, 1 pot if channeled to 5 stages. If you would only have, let's say, 2 arrows, then the first main arrow would spawn 3 pots, and the second main arrow would spawn 2 pots if channeled to 5 stages. This could actually allow for more total arrow hits against extremely small single targets, but in my opinion, it's not worth it to change a support gem for that, since the support gems usually don't come with a damage multiplier. Maybe 1 additional arrow is good for boss damage, but that reduces your possible clear speed since your spore pods will not spawn that far away anymore. So I actually recommend no additional arrows here. When it comes to leveling the character, it's actually quite easy. It's not the best I ever had, but it also wasn't the worst. I also really want to mention that if you're in the PoE, go over to notes and there's a lot of things. Like, I tried to put pretty much everything in here, but I obviously couldn't put everything in here. But down in the bottom you can see leveling at league start. This is kind of like some ideas what you want to pick up, like split arrow early on, then go for rain of arrows. You have all the links and what colors you are looking for early on, and then on level 28 plus you are going for Scourge arrow, and then yeah, a lot of setups depending on your gear, on your stats, and on the links you drop. I want to talk about the leveling progression because players that do not have PoE might find this interesting. So if you have PoE, you can just skip this section. Just note that all the progression can be found in the bottom left drop-down menu. Okay, let's start. So first on your leveling, that's just pretty easy. You start with life, go down here, toxic strikes, thick skin for some life, and farsight for some damage and utility. Easy, nothing really special right here. Part number 2 is herbalism, and then swift venoms, huge damage if you're poison damage, and we are poison damage, and also a mana leech note down here. I recommend you choose it or you take it early on, because otherwise you might forget it and then people will always ask, how do you sustain mana? This is how you sustain mana. Part number 3, which is where you usually put or get your first Ascendancy. These are the first nodes I would recommend going for, the Nature's Reprisal. 30% increased chaos damage is nice. We don't really care about the increased area of effect, but the line that says when you kill a poisoned enemy during any flask effect, nearby enemies are poisoned is huge. This is where all your, or pretty much all of your clear speed comes from. That means that if there's a pack and you fire one arrow and the arrow only hits like 2 enemies within a pack, they will die. They will then kind of like spread the virus, the poison onto everything else within the pack, and then everything just dies without you having to fire again. Really good. On the passive tree, you would go for Master Fletcher and Face Acrobatics. Master Fletcher is a lot of damage, Face Acro, and Acro is a lot of evasion and dodge. Part number 4, probably also your second lab, Master Toxicist. 10% of physical as extra chaos damage means more damage. 10% of physical converted to chaos damage. That means in late game you will be able to run physical reflect because you will have a total of 95. 10% more chaos damage with attacks, just more multiplier. And the last line that says poisons you inflict during any flask effect have 40% chance to do 100% more damage. That pretty much means 40% more damage. Like multiplier on multiplier on multiplier, huge damage on this node. The rest you want to go for is Fatal Toxins, huge damage as well, Hunter's Gambit, damage, Revenge of the Hunted, life evasion rating, and Method to the Madness, damage, and some chaos resistance. Part number 5. You will notice that I picked up the mana nodes on the beginning of the tree. This is because you will probably have your third lab, which means you gain 30%, or not 30%, you gain 3 charges every 3 seconds. This 3 charges every 3 seconds is affected by increased flask charges gained. So this is why we pick up these 2 nodes up here and down here. This one also grants strength and intelligence, which are 2 stats that you really want. And yeah, more maximum mana means you can put a higher level clarity or precision, whatever you choose to run, because they reserve a flat amount instead of a percentage amount. So yeah, this is better mana reservation, better mana sustain, easy. Heart of Oak is nice, regen and life and movement speed on the way there. Nothing really special. Then you go resourcefulness and entropy, coordination, blood siphon, and trickery. Part number 6, which usually is your Uber lab. I chose to go Master Alchemist because of the elemental element immunity. Being immune to elemental elements is huge defense, and if you think you don't need the defense, you can go for Nature's Adrenaline instead, which would grant you attack speed and movement speed, so just utility and a little bit of damage. On the tree, you want to go to the left now, pick up Bravery. On the way there you have some intelligence and Art of the Gladiator with attack speed and accuracy. And then you want to go Profane Chemistry, Life and Flask effect, and Life Flask effect, because Life Flasks is pretty much your own region, so this is really important to stay alive. Then you want to travel over Sentinel, up here to Constitution into the big Scion Life Wheel. This is actually the last part, so like this is the core part of the tree. I included a level 1 hunter tree, what I would actually do, which means you pick up all the jewel sockets and you pick up this jewel socket, there's a cluster jewel up here, and then you fill up all these little life nodes up here, down here, over there, this life node, up here, life nodes. So yeah, if you don't need that much life, which maybe you don't need, then you go for something like Avatar of the Hunt, and this small node down here is some really nice damage as well. If you're looking for more damage nodes on the tree, you might also want to pick up Berserking. Increased attack speed means you will reach your 5 charges from your Scourge arrow faster, which means maybe a little bit more damage if you play it perfectly, but yeah, it's just is something that you have to feel like you want it. Like, I recommend you try that out and then just attack it if you want it, or leave it if you don't feel like you need it. For the Bandit, I went for 2 passive points. That means you kill every bandit within the quest. Within the PoE, if you go to items, you will see that there are 3 different setups. Starter gear setup with just some League Start rares and maybe some uniques that cost just 1 or 2 chaos in the beginning. Some endgame gear, which I recommend, and that's all. You don't need more than this to clear all game, every content in the game. And also a min-max example if you want to go for just, min-maxing. I'm going to talk about the endgame gear. And also important for the skills, there's also the same. Starter setups, endgame setups, and min-maxed setups. And down here you have some setups which you will never change throughout any stage of the game. Also, no matter what game stage you are in, there are some things that actually never change. First of all, your rare items. You want to cap your resistances with those, get your attributes, and stack a lot of life. You also want to get chaos res on there and evasion rating. On your jewels, you want to go for something with life, poison duration, damage with poison, chaos damage over time multi, or something like damage over time. You can see it on the screen right now. Just choose whether you want defense or offense. As far as enchants go, the best ones are for a helmet additional Scourge arrow at maximum charge, like additional Scourge arrow spore pot, at maximum charge. On the gloves you want anything with reflection, and on the boots you want regen on hit or increased attack cast speed when you killed recently, or something like movement speed if you didn't get hit recently. You can choose whatever you want there. And none of those are super mega important and necessary. For the most part, I didn't play with a helmet enchant, so you're fine on this one. I said there are 3 different gear setups, but I'm going to focus on only the recommended endgame gear setup. Because starter gear is only for pretty much day 1 or day 2, and min-maxed gear is not necessary to clear all content. So the recommended endgame gear is about like 7 to 10 exalted, so pretty much nothing, even in the beginning of the league. So let's talk about the first piece here, which is the Darkscorn Assassin Bow. A lot of damage, and the last line that says 20% chance for poisons inflicted with this weapon to deal 300% more damage pretty much means a 60% more damage multiplier. The combination of all these mods actually makes this bow as strong, or in some cases stronger, in some cases weaker, than a highly invested, super expensive, rare crafted bow in the endgame. So I always went with Darkscorn, never had any damage problems. Also really important on here is the 25% of physical damage converted to chaos damage. That means that the combination of Scourge Arrow with your Ascendancy and this bow, you will have 95% conversion, and that means you can physical reflect maps. The line that says 25% of physical damage taken from hits taken as chaos damage might sound like a bad thing, because usually players don't have a lot of chaos resistance, but since it's relatively easy to get to 75% chaos resistance and get the Pantheon, which says reduced chaos damage taken, this line pretty much says 20% less physical damage taken. As a chest piece, I highly recommend going for a Dendrobate. This is extremely cheap even if you buy it as a 6-link, like I bought it at day 6 or 7, 6-linked for 60 chaos only, so yeah, nothing. This chest essentially grants us a 6.5 link, and this is also why we put the Scourge Arrow, like our damage setup, into the chest instead of our bow. Because it says targeted gems are supported by level 10 lesser poison. But that's not only the only damage roll on here. The last 2 lines that say increased damage and increased poison duration if you have at least blah 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 dex and int are super expensive. So once you pick up a Dendrobate, make sure you hit the 300 dex, which should be relatively easy because I believe you get pretty much all of it on the tree, but you want to make sure to get the 150 intelligence. the damage rolls on here is like pretty much a 20 to 25% more damage multiplier if you have the attributes. The next item would be the drill neck. That's a pretty cheap unique quiver as well. It normally has an implicit that says arrows pierce an additional target. We don't need that, so you can take a corrupted implicit there, but you don't have to take a corrupted implicit. The quiver grants attack speed, damage, evasion, life, defense, damage or physical damage to bow attacks, again damage, and arrows deal 50% increased damage with hit and ailments to target they pierce. Scourge arrow always pierces enemies, so the 50% increased damage is always active. The next item is the glove socket, which is the Embalmer Carnal Mids. We don't really care about the socketed gems are supported by level 20 wild toxins, but the rest of the stats are really strong. Added chaos damage is just straight up damage, and increased poison duration is another multiplier for poison damage. Like, the longer the poison lasts, the more damage it will deal over its maximum period of time. That means you can stack more and deal more damage. I hope that this explanation is okay. And you also have maximum life and chaos resistance on here. Then a really important but also really expensive item is the Circle of Nostalgia with increased chaos damage while affected by Herald of Agony, and Herald of Agony has increased buff effect. This ring usually costs like 2 to 3 exalted in the beginning of the league, but also grants a lot of damage. It doesn't only grant a lot of damage, but also all attributes and chaos resistance. Two really valuable stats that you need in this build. The implicits can be pretty much everything. I went for global accuracy rating just to help out cap my accuracy. So without the ring I was at 98, and with the ring I was at 99, so not a huge deal. I went over the rare gear before, but I quickly want to mention the key points. So on rare gear you wanna go and cap your resistances and get all the attributes you need. After that, stack as much life as possible. A lot of players kinda like ask me, hey, why am I so squishy? I'm level like 85 and I have 3k life. And then they send me their PoE, and then they have like life on just 2 of the items. So make sure to get life on every single rare item you have. Also, you want to make sure that your chaos res is as high as possible. It can also be kept with 75%. And if you have the money, if you have the currency, get all the stats that I mentioned before on high evasion basis. Jewels as well. Go for life if you want defense, otherwise go for poison duration, damage with poison, chaos damage over time multi, damage over time, physical or chaos damage to attacks or bow attacks, or some attack speed. Really important is also to get phasing on the Abyss Jewel once you have a Stygian Mice equipped, because phasing means you can run through enemies. It's really nice. And you can also see the enchants that I mentioned earlier. I also have a Cluster Jewel, which might not be a thing in future leagues anymore, we do not know yet, but I went for a medium Cluster Jewel with 4 or 5 passive skills, and added small passive skills grant 5% to chaos damage over time multi. I went for the notables Brute for Potency and Circling Oblivion. If you want to have kind of like a small overview over all the notables, you can just go over into the PoE, over to notes. There I have the ones that I tried out listed. So yeah, go over there and check them out. Also on the jewel I went for chaos resistance, because chaos resistance is defense in this build. And really important is one passive skill is a jewel socket as well, which means we can just put any jewel in there. Let's have a look at the flasks now, because we are Pathfinder, so flasks are super important. I recommend a bubbling divine life flask of staunching. That means instant recovery, and after the instant recovery you still have some nice life regen. Immunity to bleed is there because you don't get bleed that often, but once you can see the bleed debuff, just press life flask, get rid of the bleed debuff. Another really nice flask I use in maps is the Sin's Rebirth. It grants a lot of evasion rating, means defense. We don't care about the immunity to ignite here because we have the Ascendancy to be immune to all elemental ailments, but Unholy Might is really strong. Unholy Might means you get 30% of physical as extra chaos. Since all our damage scales off of physical damage, that's pretty much 30% damage right here. Then in maps you also want to use a Quicksilver. This one is a Quicksilver with heat, because if you do not use the Master Alchemist, you need the freeze immunity somewhere. What I've been running with is a Alchemist Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline with increased movement speed and increased effect, because I have the Master Alchemist, so I don't need the freeze removal. On my Jade Flask, also only during mapping, like these two flasks are only in maps. I have a Jade Flask with obviously evasion rating and immune to curses. Most bosses don't curse, so you don't need this against bosses. Another really strong flask is a Cinder Swallow Urn. It grants Onslaught, which means attack, cast, movement speed, and some really nice recovery mods once or while you are mapping. I also went for the increased movement speed down here because I believe that's the most valuable stat, but you can choose a different stat if you want. You can check the PoE wiki to see all the stats it can roll with. Something really important on here is also enemies ignited by you during Flask effect take 10% increased damage. That means we want to ignite. This is why I have fire damage to attacks on my amulet. You don't have to have it on your amulet, you can also have it on ring, or you can have it on an Abyss jewel, or just any other jewel, or just anywhere. You just want a small source of fire damage. You can also craft it on your jewelry. As I said, these two flasks are only for maps. So when you're bossing, you wanna swap out these two. And when I'm talking about bossing, I mean really big instance bosses like Shaper, Elder, Uber Elder, Conquerors, Sirus and stuff like that. And then you go for a Corralitos. Increased duration is only important against tough enemies, because if the enemy dies within 1.5 seconds, then the increased duration doesn't do anything. But if you have increased duration against a high health enemy, that means you can stack more poisons, and then more poisons will tick, which pretty much means more damage. So this is huge damage, like huge damage against single target. This is the strongest damage flask you can take. Another strong damage flask, but the weakest of these three, is an Atziri's Promise. The roll gain 20% of physical damage as extra chaos during effect is kind of close to Unholy Might, just not 30% but 20%. You don't care about the roll down there, which says 15% of elemental damage is extra chaos. I just have max rolled 1. You can have 10 there, it doesn't matter. This also grants some nice chaos resistance if you're not capped yet, and the chaos damage leech as life during Flask effect helps actually against bosses if you get hit, because even though most of your damage is coming from damage over time, you will leech a little bit of life here. Something I forgot to mention when I was talking about running maps and flasks while running maps is that if you have a map that has no regen or no leech, you want to swap the Jade Flask for a Mana Flask. This one is Enduring Eternal Mana Flask of Body. So get the curse immunity on here, and Flask effect is not removed at full mana. This will provide you with more mana than you could ever spend. Also, if you're running Simulacrum wave 20, sometimes mobs are so tanky that you're not going to deal enough damage with your hits, so leech won't be enough, and then you wanna take this flask as well. When looking at the amulet and an anointment, I recommend freedom of movement early on because it's super cheap, grants phasing and movement speed. Really nice, really efficient. Later on, when you can afford a silver oil and you have the phasing somewhere else, go for dirty techniques. This is huge damage, like crazy. Like I believe it's like 10 or 11% more damage just from this node. If you want some defense, then anything with life regen, flask effect, or whatever you feel like is necessary, you can take. Let's go over all the skills, how I link them, and in which item I put them. In here in our chest piece we have the main damage link with Scourge Arrow, Infused Channeling, Deadly Ailments, Unbound Ailments, Bile Toxins, and Mirage Archer. Don't be confused about my Awaken gems. I just went to min-max the build a little bit, so I have Awakened Gems instead of my normal gems. I don't have the normal gems anymore. So yeah, you will deal more than enough damage without Awakened Gems. If you're not mapping, then you want to swap out your Mirage Archer for a poison support. That means you lose a lot of clear speed from the Mirage Archer, but you don't clear speed against bosses, so you can pick up poison for more damage. The first falling I want to talk about is a Wither linked with Spell Totem, multiple totems, and faster casting. These totems will debuff enemies that are close to them with Wither, which means up to 90% increased chaos damage taken, so huge damage right there. In our gloves we have the Curse setup, Stormbrand, Curse on Hit, Despair, and along with your totems you want to spawn it, or you want to precast it against bosses. It will apply the curse for a duration of up to 15 seconds, which is insane, because if you like hand cast the curse, you always have to reapply it. With this one you can precast it, and then it will pretty much stay on the boss for the whole fight. We also link the Stormbrand with blind support. Blind means the enemy has 50% chance to miss, so pretty much more evasion for you. If you don't want the maximum damage from Despair, you can go for Temporal Chains in here. Temporal Chains is both not as much damage as Despair, but still quite some damage, but also grants you some defense by slowing down the enemy. In my boots, I have a customer damage taken level 3, linked with an Immortal Call level 5. This is just some damage reduction in maps. If you get hit for 600 damage, roughly 700, Immortal Call will activate, you will take less damage for a duration there. I also have my movement ability in here, Dash with Second Wind. This is the best movement ability you can take right now. No questions asked, this just take Dash and Second Wind, and that's your main movement ability. Let's go over to the bow right now. So you can see that I have a 6-link bow. You do not need a 6-link, you only need a 5-link. In here you have all your auras and Mana Reservation things. You want to have a high level precision and Herald of Agony. These are the two most important things you have in here. In addition to that, you can go for 2 out of the 3 I'm going to mention right now. So the first is Summon Skitterbots, which will chill and shock enemies, meaning it's both offense and defense. Flesh and Stone means just a lot of defense. Or you can take a low level Clarity if you are still having mana problems, and then swap it out for Skitterbots or Flesh and Stone depending on what you need. You want to link all of these 4 Mana Reservation skills with an Enlighten. I think an Enlighten 2 is not enough, so you need an Enlighten 3, which might lead to some mana problems. So if you only have an Enlighten 3, you might want to put Clarity in here anyways. So yeah, but Enlighten 4 isn't that expensive, it's like 5x, so not that big of a deal. In our last socket in here, like as I mentioned, you don't have to link those. I have a portal, because I just don't like to carry portal scrolls with me, so I have a portal stone in here. Instead, you can go for Blood Rage. That means a lot of attack speed and frenzy charges in maps, but you have a degen, and since you don't regen a lot of health, I don't like that, but try it out. You can also try Withering Step, like this will inflict Withered debuff, like not 15 but 5 stacks of Withered against nearby enemies. So a small damage debuff if you just want to have something within maps without placing down Wither totems. Another damaging thing is Plague Bearer, which will activate kind of like an aura around you once you have it stacked up and activated to deal a little bit more damage. I would say it's not necessary, and it kind of forces you to get close to enemies, which you don't always want. You can also take a Vaal Grace. In this case, you wouldn't activate the Grace aura, you just would use the activation of the Vaal Grace against bosses or against something when you feel like you need more dodge. Same goes with Vaal Haste. You will not activate the Haste aura. Instead, you will only use the Vaal Haste once you have the things already. And this will grant you some attack and cast speed and also movement speed if you are in a sticky situation to get out of there. If, however, you are lucky and get a blue socket down here, like 3 off-socket colors is already pretty hard, but it takes around 100 chromatics to get these colors. So if you're really lucky to get a blue socket or get white sockets, just as I have, you can take a Vaal Blight in there. Not for the Blight, but for the Vaal Blight. You can use the Vaal Blight against bosses to kind of make another chaos damage debuff, so you deal even more damage with the Blight. Or if you think you want a little bit more mana, you can take a low level clarity in the last socket as well. So a lot of things to choose from. Choose whatever you want. I went with the portal. I sometimes took Blood Rage. I didn't like Blood Rage, but yeah, take what you want. You can also use anything in there. Just experiment, take what you feel comfortable with. So I already told you what to do in maps and what to do against bosses, but again, in maps you wanna put in Mirage Archer instead of Poison in your main link, and you do not want to bother casting your Stormbrand or your Wither Totems anywhere. So just run through the maps, channel up, fire, you're good to go. But once you encounter a boss in a map, you might want to place down your Wither Totems and also your brand for the curse setup if you feel like you need more damage. And against big, super strong, instant bosses, you also wanna take Poison Support instead of Mirage Archer. Also note that you can also swap out the Flasks, so Corralitos and a Serious Promise only against bosses, and Quicksilver and a Jade when mapping. If you need mana, instead of the Jade, get a Mana Flask. As far as Pantheon goes, I recommend Lunaris for mapping and Solaris for bossing. You only change that for Sirus and Uber Elder, just like whenever I say bossing in this video, I am talking about big instanced bosses, not map bosses. Like in a map, don't bother to change anything in your setup. As a minor guard, I would say you go for Shakari because it synergizes well with your Darkscorn bow because of the physical as chaos damage taken on the bow and less chaos damage taken on Shakari. If you feel like you don't need that additional defense, you can take the completed Garukan for movement speed and some evasion in dangerous situations. And if you want to try to face tank some stuff, like I tried it a few times, I died a few times, you can take Tokuhama as a minor god instead. This was everything about the build so far. If you have any further questions, just check the notes section within the path of building or check the comment section below the video if somebody already asked a question. If you have a new question, just don't hesitate to ask them in the comments. Either me or some other player will try to help you out. You might have also noticed that this video was extremely long and a lot longer than all of my other videos or build guides before. This is because I tried to put in a lot more detail for players that do not have path of building. Please sound off in the comments if you appreciate a longer, more detailed build guide, or if it's better if it's a little bit shorter but the most important information is within the video and then the detailed information is within a POB. I know that for most of you written guides would be a lot easier. I'm going to do written guides, just not yet, and not yet for this build. Maybe in the future there will be a link in the video description, so maybe I will already have a written guide. But I really want to thank you for all the support over the past weeks and months actually. I'm really having a blast making videos. I'm loving doing these videos, so yeah. Thank you very much for all your support. Thank you very much for watching this video. I'm still recovering from my injury in my back and my shoulder, which is why I didn't stream for the past weeks, and which is probably why I'm not going to stream during the 3.10 Delirium League again, but I'm definitely going to stream once 3.11 hits. So stay tuned for that, follow my Twitch, like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to have more content like this, and leave your feedback in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching. I am Jay, and I'm out.